We're now going to take up the case study of Mrs. Anu Fateh Donaldson. And as we may recall, Mrs. Fateh Donaldson, who I will call Anu for short, has 3 surviving children: Bash, the eldest, short for Sebastian, and Clara, and her youngest son, Donald. And as we see, both Bash and Clara are somewhat close in the vicinity of Windsor where she lives, and the youngest son, Donald, who has some issues with substance abuse, has been living in Calgary. And Donald comes back at his mother's request and takes a bit of time to sort of get himself back together again financially and emotionally, and then decides that he's going to stay and help around the house because his mother needs some help. And this is a bit of a surprise to the family, but he starts doing the handyman work and he ends up trying to assist in a variety of little ways. But we start noticing a few different things. And so this little video is going to take the issue of the relationship with the children, and what we're going to be discussing is what's known as a private care agreement. And so when we think about a private care agreement, we think of an exchange, usually of property, and it's typically the family home, in exchange for a promise to provide care. And as we see here, Bash has gone with the mum, Anu, to the bank and has gotten all of assets put into joint name, including the house. And there is this promise, we think, to provide care in exchange for that house. At least it seems like it. Often we run into private care agreements. These things are not documented. They're not written down anywhere, and people don't really know what's supposed to go into it. Very often they seem like a good idea at the time, but they don't have the foresight to go through a lot of the what ifs. So what if, for instance, the mom ended up falling in hurting herself earlier, which she, as she does later on in the case study, and wasn't able to take care of the situations at home, even with the support of Donald. What if Donald got remarried? What if mom got remarried? What if Donald wanted to move for work? And there's a lot of different questions about how that asset, the home, is to be used. We see that they're put into joint name, which is often done in a effort to avoid probate. And you see that that's the discussion that frames the conversation when they're having the sit down with the financial planner and at the financial institution. They say that we think there's sort of instructions. The instructions are a little bit clear. What we see is that the person who works for the financial institution is kind of putting words in the mouth of Anu herself. So they're asking, is it that you want to do this in order to avoid probate? And the answer is sure, yes, I guess so. So it's not really perhaps quite as clear. And we also see that Anu looks unsettled and she won't look in the eyes of the financial planner, whose name is Ellen. And the question about avoiding probate is often a sticky one. While it's true that if you have things in joint name, typically they will not then go into the will. And as a result, if all assets are jointly owned, then there is nothing really that has to be probated because everything continues on. And certainly some people do this in a way of estate planning. I'm a little unclear with regards to this particular situation if that was really the goal or if the goal was more of a financial abuse situation. So we have a question raised with this circumstance, with the house being put into joint name, whether or not there is a valid private care agreement or whether it's some form of abuse. Private care agreements, as we say, are not illegal or unethical, but they are rarely done in a situation that doesn't cause problems. So again, just to refresh, a private care agreement is an exchange of services, typically for the value of the house. And in this particular circumstance, the private care agreement was done right away. Sometimes the promise to leave the house is done in a will. They, as I say, rarely work out, and we can certainly see that there's a lack of trust with these children. You can imagine that Bash and Clara would find it very confusing to find out that, in fact, their youngest brother, Douglas, now had all assets in joint name. So we see that this private care agreement is in play, and we now know also that the assets from the bank account as well as the home are also in joint name. If we skip to the bottom of it, we see that these assets have not only been put jointly in the name of Anu and her youngest son, Douglas, but that Douglas has quite inappropriately put on his power of attorney hat, if you'd like to call it that, and has changed where the funds are out of a joint account and into his own account. Now, certainly that's not acting in the obligation of a fiduciary, that highest degree of obligation between a person and another person. So, where it's not in theory illegal per se to move assets from a joint account into a single account wearing the hat of a power of attorney, it is inappropriate if it's benefiting that person. So in this, we should be quite concerned about how Douglas is interacting both with the private care agreement, and we should be quite concerned about how he's acting with the joint accounts. And then at the very end of it, we should also be very concerned to see that he's been moving money back. We may wish to alert the financial institution and see if they can freeze the accounts or ensure that the accounts don't get dispersed in case he decides to take the money and run. That finishes this little video. We'll move on to the next one discussing the case of Anu Fateh Donaldson.